My dear brothers and sisters, this morning we hear in the gospel that in order to have faith, sometimes we're asked to be open to something new. See, the people of Jesus' hometown thought that they knew him. They knew what family he came from, right? He's the carpenter, Mary's son. We're not too sure if he's Joseph's son because she did go off to visit her cousin Elizabeth, and then she came back and she was pregnant, and we knew that they weren't living together yet, so we know that he's Mary's son. Little suspicious there, right? Oh, and we know he's got these cousins, James, Joseph, Judas, Simon, and other female cousins that the Hebrew people would call brothers and sisters. Close family relationships. So we know where this guy's from. We know him. As they say, familiarity breeds contempt, right? We've heard the story. And I'm sure that we've all experienced that too. And it's true, we can see throughout history in the lives of the saints, in our very own faith lives too, that sometimes we are being asked to be open to something new. When St. Francis was living in Assisi, he was doing the normal thing that everybody else was doing. You see, he was middle class. His father had all this wealth, and he was trying to be upwardly mobile to become a noble. That was normal. So when he broke the mold and gave away all his possessions and began to serve the lepers down in the valley and began to collect stones in order to rebuild churches, people literally thought he was crazy. We're used to, of course, St. Francis already in a statue, but we forget that people did not immediately accept his message. They called him pazzo, which if you speak Italian, you know means crazo. And they threw mud at him because he was breaking their expectations, their status quo. He was introducing something that was different. And we see in the life of St. Francis something amazing, because before that time, it was hardly heard of that anyone would ever reach such a high degree of sanctity that they would have the stigmata. So he really broke the mold. And he was really able to introduce a lot of people to the love of God. But is it not true, of course, that sometimes we get stuck in a rut? Don't be bashful. Raise your hand if you're sitting in the exact same seat you always sit in. We get stuck in a rut. We get stuck at looking at things in a particular way. And sometimes when we do that, as we heard in the gospel, we literally limit what God's able to do. True story, I'm changing the names in order to protect the guilty. Good, we got a little chuckle. Good. When I was in the parish in Connecticut, we would have monthly healing masses. And this one woman, we'll call her Jean. She came twice for the prayer team to pray for her friend, we'll call him Peter. Okay? And Peter was suffering from stage 4 bone cancer and leukemia. She came 1 month. She had us pray. She came back the next month and reported that the stage 4 bone cancer was gone in a month. But he still had the leukemia. So, as we were praying after the Mass, somebody had just the pure faith that God said it, so they were going to believe it, that if they declared something in faith that they would have it, right? And so somebody said, God, just give him new blood. He wasn't even there. We were just praying for him. So Jean comes back the next month and reports that Peter's leukemia had gone away too. So then, because it's always good to use these stories, because they're true, to show people what God is able to do, I mentioned it at the next Mass in my homily about how people can bring the sick to Jesus at Mass. They don't have to have any special prayer people coming, because here we are, we're at Mass, and it's the same Jesus who cured the sick and raised the dead, who comes to us in his body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. Well, hearing the story about Jean, it clicked with this one woman. We'll call her Diane, not her real name. Diane's nephew had been in a state, we'll say it was the state of Virginia, but, again, changing what needs to be changed to protect the guilty. Diane's nephew had been in a severe car accident, and he had suffered traumatic brain injury. And she thought it was a miracle already that he was alive, and the doctors had said, we don't understand how he's still alive. But he was in ICU. Hearing the story about Jean asking for more for Peter, she realized it's not wrong. It's not wrong to ask for specific healing. She had previously thought, well, the miracle is already that he's still alive. So therefore, it would be greedy to ask for more. I really think God likes it when we trust him. I don't think any one of us, if we trust God, that we're ever going to get up to heaven and have God say to us, you put too much trust in me. Actually, I think the opposite is the case, that perhaps he might say, why did you not trust me more? I wanted to give you so many good things, but you limited me because you didn't have your hands open to me. So, Diane, she realizes it's not wrong to trust for more, so she comes up to communion and receives communion, she tells me later, specifically for the intention of the healing of her nephew. She told me that the next day, her nephew sat up for the first time in ICU unassisted, was able to get up out of bed, take a few steps, and hug his father for the first time. When she heard the news, she was filled with joy because she knew that was the answer to her prayer. She knew it. No one could tell her otherwise. She was sure. We heard in that opening prayer that we're specifically asking that we be filled with joy. Brothers and sisters, when we see God, when we keep him before us, we look to him, and Scripture tells us this, Psalm 34. We look to him and we are radiant with joy because God can fill us with greater hope, greater faith, greater love than anything we've ever experienced before. And he can take what we have had and he can make it a little bit more because he refines and perfects our faith. So it says in Hebrews that Jesus perfects our faith. And it's not wrong for us to be willing to admit, gee, maybe I've believed about God in this much or believed in God about this much, but maybe God's asking for a little bit more. Maybe God's asking me to step out of my comfort zone. Because let's face it, and this is true for all of us, from the newest Christian to the oldest, from the most humble of persons to the Pope, even the saints themselves had this same issue that they had to always ask God to increase in them their faith, their hope, and their love. Many of you may remember back in the day, these used to be prayers that we would pray, sometimes before Mass, sometimes in the morning, an offering of faith. It's like exercise, right? If you've ever been to the gym, you have to keep exercising something, right? Otherwise it's going to go flabby. Likewise, our faith muscle, we have to continue to exercise it step by step, that when we see the goodness of God being manifest maybe in something small, we can realize, God, you are so good to care about this small little thing that no one would have even thought of. But you thought of it, God. You remembered that this was important to me. You brought this to come to pass. God, if that's so important to you, surely the more heavy matters are also important to you as well. Again, because we don't want to limit God and what he can do. We do not want to limit what our weekly, sometimes daily encounter with the risen Jesus Christ can do, not only in our lives, but for others. Because when we limit God, we see. Actually, it's kind of amazing. When the people of Nazareth limited Jesus, he was still able to cure a few sick people. So imagine when we begin to say, God, maybe I haven't seen this before. Maybe I haven't seen the fullness of what you have yet. But I'm willing to step out. I'm willing to get uncomfortable. I'm willing to begin to pray boldly, trusting that you have promised good things, and you have also promised that you would give the graces that we need in order to have that perfect relationship with you. Like a good father, sometimes God does not give things immediately, right? You who are parents know you don't give something sometimes always immediately. Sometimes you do, and it's surprising. But sometimes you wait for the right time, the right moment. It says in Scripture that sometimes we have to make sure that we are praying not for selfish ambition, nor out of fear, but in humble relational trust. When you love somebody, when you have a relationship with somebody of trust, you can go to them, and you can't force them, because if you force them, it's kind of offensive, isn't it? If you try to emotionally manipulate them, God, unless you do this, or God, if you do this, then I'm going to do this. We try to bribe God. I mean, that doesn't work, does it? No, it doesn't. Instead, when we begin to challenge ourselves to trust God, we begin to see Him working in ways beyond what we can imagine. So this is what we ask God today, specifically to surprise us. That He might surprise us today. That though we thought maybe we were just coming to the same Mass, and then when we saw Father Chris, we thought, oh, no, he's going to drone on and on and on again. That maybe God might surprise us today. Especially we ask for increased knowledge of His love for us, first and foremost. Because, that can be one of the things that most stops us from believing. We can think somehow that God didn't love us, or somehow because something disappointing happened. So we ask specifically for that kind of healing in our hearts first. So that trusting God all the more, we can begin to see step by step Him working in our lives, step by step, Him pulling us from the rut to walking on water.